Welcome to the Fantasy Football Forge. This is a continuation of the series of over and undervalued players at each position. Top 5 for most of the positions, top 3 for a couple of positions. And thank you very much. In this video, we will be looking at, I actually haven't determined yet, let's look at the undervalued tight ends of the 2022 season. And I will be replaying the same exact introduction at the start of each of these positional videos for the tight ends, specifically for this video. So feel free to skip ahead if you have already seen the other video for this position, because very shortly I'm going to be covering the entire position and how they ranked via their equalized values in the tiers, and then I'll start the countdown of the under/overvalued players, so you can just skip all the way to that countdown if that's all you are here for. By the timestamps at the bottom in YouTube. You should know how that works. So this list here is going to be determined with the help of my equalized value system compared to the average fantasy points per week, which is, something that a lot of people look at to determine how players played the previous season, where they ranked, and just call it a day there. But I went one step further a little bit to kind of offset some of the issues with using that system, and I speak all about that in a video, the wide receivers overvalued wide receivers video. I believe it's the overvalued. It's the longer of the two videos in this series for the wide receiver position, where you can see me talk all about the EV system, go into some details of what its strengths are and what its weaknesses are. So check that out. It would be too long to go through in each of these videos. And just a reminder, I go through the first 17 weeks of the fantasy football season, not week 18, because there's just too many issues that come with that week, and players not playing, teams, maybe players playing a half of a game, etc. You can also find this chart, what you're seeing on this screen, up at my website, www.theFFforge.com. There's a link down in the description as well to the website. If this is not up there yet as of the time of you watching this video, congratulations, you're probably one of the earlier viewers of the video, so I definitely appreciate you for that. And it'll be up on the website within a day or two, but I'll have them up after I've posted both the under and overvalued videos for each position. Then I'll put that position up on the website. And what we are looking at here is ordered via the ranking of my equalized value system. Over here on the left, you can see those numbers, but that's the order that they're ranked in. Over here on the right, you can see the average ranking via the average fantasy points per week, which is just to the left of that furthest right column there. And I have those color-coded via the color coding scale here, just like I have my EV system. So tight end 6 here would be in the darkest green, tight end 12 there in a little bit of a lighter green. And then you can see players who either didn't qualify for both being a tight end 12, tight end 18, whatever the case, for the EV system here, if they were scored between 24.75 to 27 points on the EV scale to under 27, so 26.9, then they would have been what we could classify as a tight end 15 here. And so I did color some of those in-betweens, and that's where we have these, and I put a little asterisk by each name. And I think we are at that time. Let's see. Yes, we can go ahead and just look at the position on a whole here. What order do I have them ranked in as far as the value that they brought your teams in the 2022 season? Well, of course, Travis Kelce is the #1 tight end, the only tight end here to be considered a tight end 6 on the season as a whole. Then we have Dallas Goedert also separating himself from the masses here. So you can see that huge gap between Travis Kelce and Dallas Goedert even there. Yeah, once again, #1 tight ends can be absolutely amazing for you, and Travis Kelce was amazing this season. Then we look at the tight end 15s here in a group. We have Zach Ertz, TJ Hawkinson, and George Kittle all doing really, really well for your teams. We follow that up with the tight end 18s, another smaller group here with Mark Andrews, Pat Freiermuth, and Darren Waller. And so I think right there is where I would draw the line as a top 8 tight ends that really actually helped and were reliable tight ends to your team to differing extents. Then we look forward, and Taysom Hill, Dawson Knox, David Njoku, Evan Ingram, Greg Dulcich, Gerald Everett, and Hayden Hurst all fit into a tier. And these players are all going to be your tight end 21s. And I know the coloring's really close here, but I just wanted to differentiate them a little bit. But just a little ways behind those guys, we have the tight end 24s in a tier, and those are going to be your Kyle Pitts, Dalton Schultz, Juwan Johnsons, Cole Kmet, Noah Fant, Tyler Higbee. Players who, from just looking at this list, for the most part, they all had stretches within the season where they were good, or maybe more like a Kyle Pitts is probably just going to be extremely inconsistent with some sort of mediocrity in there. Looks to be about right. Yeah, that was kind of the case. Some of these guys, you were able to hop on the train and ride them for a couple of weeks. Other guys, you probably whiffed more often than not on at this point. But you know, Tyler Higbee definitely had his periods within the season where you could have capitalized on that, even at the bottom of that list. Then we're going to get on to guys who were truly, hopefully you got lucky with them, fill-ins. And that's going to be Tyler Conklin and Robert Tonyan here. Actually, we have a little tier. And then just below them, we have a tier with Hunter Henry and Austin Hooper. I don't know about you, but those colors look identical to me. I bet you they're not, but yeah. That's why we have the asterisks here to help out. Then we have our final tier as tight end 33s, which is going to be Chigoziem Okonkwo and Mike Gesicki, guys who probably had very, very bottomed out floors with some oomph here and there. And as you can see, in the case of Chig at least, you might have been able to capitalize on it thanks to how that worked out for him throughout the season. But nonetheless, their whole resume, that's what they looked like. So let's move on to the whichever video this is, under or over underranked. Hard Cut. Coming in 5th place on the most undervalued tight ends list here, we have a player who, according to the average fantasy points per week, was the 21st best, if you want to say it like that, tight end in the 2022 season. However, the EV scale would push him up to the 16th best fantasy player. If you remember from looking at that list, that player is Kyle Pitts. And out of 10 games, Kyle did have 2 top 6 tight end performances. That is great. And he also had 1 top 12 performance, but otherwise, he struggled to have performances that were better than the tight end 27/tight end 30 type performances, almost half of his games finishing in that range. And so that was obviously a big detriment to him. So when we look at him compared to some guys who are supposed to be better than him, and comparing their head-to-head records against Dalton Schultz here, Juwan Johnson, Cole Kmet, Tyler Higbee, and Tyler Conklin, we would see that he had a head-to-head record of 20 victories and 25 losses. And sometimes the head-to-head record test just does not work out in favor of the argument that I am making for these players. It can be for a lot of reasons. It can be just bad luck sometimes, and sometimes it's a sign that the element of boom or bust is more important at a position than consistency is, because the EV scale does favor consistency. And for the tight end position, their output drops off so quickly that I did come to the determination last offseason in some videos that I did in a deep analysis on each of these positions, that the boom of the tight end position was often more important than consistency was for them. So please see my video on the undervalued running backs for a little bit more in-depth conversation on that. Apparently I'll have to record that video before releasing these videos. I prepared all of the work for these videos. I just don't remember that work anymore, as I did that during the playoff season, and we're now after the playoffs. So let's move along here. The number 4 most undervalued player of the 2022 season, who, via the average fantasy points per week, was ranked 19th, but via the EV, he would have been ranked number 15. And that player is Hayden Hurst of the Cincinnati Bengals. Hayden did not have much of a ceiling this year, with only one of his games that qualified as a top 3 to 6 type tight end performance, and 3 top 12 performances, but that does account for 1/3 of his games played this season, and he only had 2 or 3 truly poor performances. And because of his head-to-head record, I gave him the honors over Kyle Pitts here, even though Kyle Pitts was a little bit more exciting to look at. And so Hayden Hurst's head-to-head record against Dalton Schultz, Juwan Johnson, Cole Kmet, and Tyler Higbee was 24 victories and 19 losses. Now we're on to the top 3 undervalued tight ends of the 2022 season. And in third place, we have a player who was 10th according to the EV scale, however, was 14th via the average fantasy points per week. That player is Dawson Knox of the Buffalo Bills. He had 3 really bad games and several mediocre games, but he also had 4 top 3 to 6 tight end performances and 1 tight end 1 performance. Definitely a better season than I had suspected, to be honest. And when we compare him versus David Njoku, Evan Ingram, Dalton Schultz, and Juwan Johnson in head-to-head matchups, he came out on top with 25 victories and 21 losses. Next up, coming in second place, we have a player who you may remember being in second place at this point. He would have been ranked 5th via the average fantasy points per week. However, the EV scale pushed him all the way up to 2nd on the tight end list, and that player is Dallas Goedert. Dallas truly had the season that I expected. A super consistent top-end guy who maybe didn't have the ceiling as some of the other top-end guys, but finishing as a top 12 tight end, 9 of his 11 games is super impressive. He almost never hurt your team, and I would argue that he truly only hurt his owner's team, the lineup that week once, in which he had a tight end 27/30 performance. He did manage to add a single tight end 1 performance to his profile as well. Versus TJ Hawkinson, George Kittle, and Mark Andrews, we will see a not so great head-to-head record here against these guys, but I do want a quick side note here that I wrote for myself before doing the count. I want to say that it is immediately obvious that Dallas missed out on a poor stretch of games for Mark Andrews, which is going to hurt his tally. So here's the stretch that I'm talking about. There's Mark Andrews' stretch. Additionally to that, I do want to point out that his tight end 1 performance only helped him with 1 opponent here because 2 of them had weeks off. So this is just some of those kind of little bad luck factors that didn't work in favor of him. But all in all, his head-to-head record versus these 3 was 11-15. And against Mark Andrews specifically, he went 3-6. So that almost brought this to equal head-to-head battles against TJ Hawkinson and George Kittle there. If we were to compare them, I already talked about that stretch of games that he missed versus Mark Andrews. He definitely did have the weak winning ceiling that this head-to-head competition had, but it does appear that his floor was better than all of theirs, which helps when comparing him to non-top end tight ends versus the other players that I'm comparing him to. And what I mean by that is that if we were to compare these guys compared to some of the top 15, like 15, 16, 17th on the EV ranking scale, or just average fantasy points per week, lower ranked guys, we would see that Dallas Goedert would hold up better than them on a week in and week out basis, just because he does have that higher floor that those guys are going to be hitting less often, whereas the more inconsistent guys with these lower floors are going to give a better chance for those guys even on a not so great week to beat them. And so that's just how it works. Not a huge difference. Obviously, all of these tight ends were great tight ends, but pitting Dallas Goedert up against some pretty great tight competition there. So now let's move on to some honorable mentions before we get to the top player on this list. Pat Freiermuth, Gerald Everett, Greg Dulcich, and Noah Fant. I do think that Gerald Everett, just as far as looking forward into the 2023 season, may have benefited from some of the players around him missing games. So I would be a little bit cautious about that one going into next season. But let's move on to the number 1 ranked tight end on this list. All the way up in the 3rd spot on the EV equalized value chart. However, the 7th spot in the average fantasy points per week, we see the player Zach Ertz coming in and first on this list. Played for Arizona up until he got injured in week 10, which is included in the head-to-head here, even though he got injured in that game. All in all, Zach Ertz is almost identical to what I said for Dallas Goedert for him. They had very similar type profiles, including the fact that he also missed out on going up against Mark Andrews during Mark Andrews' more poor stretch here towards the end of the season, right down here. And so missed out on some opportunities there. Definitely, played up against elite Mark Andrews like he was for the first half of the season. But still, with all the factors going up against him there, he still went 18 and 14 and had one tie up against TJ Hawkinson, George Kittle, Mark Andrews, and Taysom Hill. So an excellent start. I mean, just look at that. He only really had one terrible game there, the game that he got injured. Other than that, a 5.1 game, which would have been disappointing. But he kept your team afloat every single week that he played, really. And so he earned his spot at the number 1 spot on this list. And I don't know how to take him going forward to next season in 2023. We'll have to see what Arizona does, but we know they just drafted Trey McBride, and Zach Ertz gets a year older, had an injury that took him out. So he'll definitely probably be looked at similarly to how he was looked at in 2022 and may not get drafted or drafted very highly. So thank you very much. Those are the undervalued tight ends of the 2022 season. Peace out.